I'm Bonnie Gardner. I'm co-chair of the Public Affairs Forum of the First Unitarian Universalist Church of Austin. Welcome. Our forums are most Sundays at noon, and they're free and open to the public. We're located at 4700 Grover Avenue. Today, I'm honored to introduce Dr. Ray Marshall, who will be speaking on shared prosperity, a topic that he has really dedicated his life to researching. And he's going to be presenting his latest research and findings. Dr. Marshall is currently Professor Emeritus in the LBJ School of Public Affairs. He holds the Audrey and Bernard Rappaport Centennial Chair in Economics and Public Policy at UT. He's originally from Louisiana. Amazingly, he joined the Navy at 15. He's a World War II veteran. He went to LSU and Millsaps College, and then he got his PhD at University of California at Berkeley in economics. He's been on the UT faculty since 1962. He was Secretary of Labor under President Jimmy Carter. And as Secretary of Labor, he expanded public service and job training programs. He was also a member of the Clinton administration's National Skills Standards Board and Advisory Commission on Labor Diplomacy. He is co-chair of the Commission on the Skills of the American Workforce, a board member of the Economic Policy Institute, a member of the Commission on State and Local Public Service. He's chair of the board of the National Center on Education and the Economy, and he's president of the International Labor Rights Fund. He's authored more than 30 books and monographs, including Thinking for a Living, Education, and the Wealth of Nations. And back to shared prosperity. Let's give Dr. Marshall a big hand and welcome him today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. It's good to be back with you here. I'm going to try to be brief, though brevity is not one of my strong points in what I have to say. I'm going to skip over some things I'd spend more time on because I know this audience reasonably well. I think this is about my 6th or 7th time to meet with you. And therefore, what I would spend some time trying to convince less informed audiences, I'll kind of skip over with you, and then get mainly to what I think is most important to talk about, and that is, what do we do about the problem? You know, not do we have one. There's a debate about that too. But the really serious debate that we ought to have is about what we ought to do. So what I'd like to do is outline the problem, give you a little bit of the evidence about the nature of the problem, and then talk a little bit about the consequences of growing inequality of wealth and income, and then spend most of the time on outlining what seemed to me to be what we ought to do about it. Let me give a broad brush of the problem. Some of you are old enough to know when we had broadly shared prosperity, which is what I faced as I came into the workforce after World War II. Workers' wages were doubling about every decade in real terms, and corporations at that time considered that their mission was to look out for stakeholders, not stockholders, entirely. And stakeholders included the workers. They included the public. And many of them, based on Andrew Carnegie's social gospel idea, that they were stewards of these resources, and it was their job to look out for the stakeholders. It was also the case that not many people doubted that we needed a strong and effective government, and that anybody who knew much about history knew that the government was not the problem. It could be. The politics can be the problem. but there are not many innovations or improvements in the quality of life that weren't jointly public-private. And that's the way it ought to be. There's not a single invention in the cell phone. That was all actually either invented by government agencies or government finance. So we need the government. I think one of the dangerous outcomes of the period since 1980 is the idea that the government is the problem and therefore create a dichotomy between the public and private sector. And part of that is an ideological recognition that the government is the only institution that has the power to take the rough edges off of competitive markets and to see to it that you play by fair rules. So we had that broad period of prosperity. To a very significant degree, it was based on the New Deal paradigm. New Deal, Franklin Roosevelt's famous comment was that you cannot have enduring prosperity unless all major groups share in that prosperity, because we're an interdependent economy. We got ourselves into a depression, the New Dealers thought, because workers and farmers and small business people didn't have enough money to buy all the stuff that the corporations could produce. And John Maynard Keynes, the greatest economist of the 20th century, proved during the Great Recession that you could have a depression. And you got to worry about a discipline. It took somebody into it before they could admit you had it. But that was the situation in the 1920s, much as it has been into the we had it in the 1980s, 90s, and up until recently. It was kind of free market fundamentalism that the New Dealers thought caused the Great Depression. And so they set about, as where we get the term New Deal. We must have a New Deal for the forgotten people in labor and agriculture and among small business people. And we developed, let workers organize unions, and there's a fair amount of evidence that the unions had a great deal to do with having a system that had broadly shared prosperity, because one of the main functions of the union was to do the most for those who needed it most and not those who needed it least. They compressed wages by bringing up low wages, but we also had Social Security and unemployment compensation and all the rest of that thing, of those things. In the late 70s, early 80s, all that started coming unglued. Since then, most of the gains in the economy have gone to the upper 10% or upper 1%, and really significant gains by the upper 1/10 of 1%. It's not because productivity has not kept going up, because it has. It is because most of the gains in the economy have gone to the top. So an important question is, why did that happen? And what can we do about it? Now, there's a debate, of course, about whether or not inequality is a problem. And then there's also a debate about, if it is there anything you can do about it? Some of my colleagues in economics say, well, there's nothing you can do about it. We admit that there's a problem, but you can't go back to this era that you long for. It's gone. The world has changed. Some universal imperatives have removed the fundamental institutions and policies that made all that possible. So it's too bad, but not much we can do about it. That's one set of critics. They also will say, when I say, well, some people are doing things about it in other countries. I used to live in Finland. The Finns are doing pretty well. Scandinavians are doing pretty well. Even in East Asia, they're doing pretty well. And they don't have growing inequality of wealth and income in those countries. So then the answer to that always is, well, you can't learn anything from them. And that's what caused a lot of trouble in this country. We had business people when I was Secretary of Labor who thought they didn't have anything to learn from their competitors. And when some of them almost went under, they suddenly decided, well, we better start paying attention to what they're doing. And I co-chaired some committees, industry committees, and almost invariably our business people would say, when I asked them, what have you learned from what we've been doing, they said how little we knew about the steel business or whatever business we were talking about, because they had monumental hubris, didn't believe they had anything to learn, but they now understand that they've got to start benchmarking. And they did. And many of our companies were saved because they benchmarked what their competitors were doing. I think we need to do the same thing with our public policy, which is one of the reasons that I'm a strong believer in the comparative adaptive method. We can't create experiments in economic policy, but we can find them in place. We can find somebody else who's dealing with it. Now, you can't copy what they're doing, but you can learn from it and adapt. And that's the reason I don't accept the idea that we can't do it because other people are doing it. Now, some other critics say that, well, there's no problem, really. You know, you're just kind of inventing a problem because the poor in this country are much better off than they are in material terms, and they have been or are. First place, that's not quite true. And it is true, though, that there are a lot of people in the world, as those critics say, who would like to have the conditions of our poor. But that's really not the important problem. The important problem is relative deprivation. That's what is hard for people to understand, that a good bit of the social pathologies associated with growing inequality are because of the relative deprivation. People's self-worth is influenced by what other people are doing. Their concept of fairness in the society is influenced by what other people are doing. You can find, for example, if you ever manage people, you can give two workers a raise and give one of them a bigger raise than you gave the other one. And that one that got a raise is going to be unhappy with the raise because of fairness and because of stress. That's the thing that tends to cause a lot of the pathological problems that people have. So it's not the absolute. They're right. You know, they always point out that poor people in this country have television. Well, I don't know what that proves, but it doesn't prove that you have an opportunity structure that makes it possible for people to move up the economic ladder. Now, some of my critics will say, as Alan Greenspan said, well, the trouble is that in this new world, American workers are overpaid. You know, the market now is global, and therefore you have to pay attention to what your competition is once you get a globalized market. And the implication of what he's saying is that the way we cause international wages to converge is to bring ours down to the global level. I reject that. I think the best policy, if we can pull it off, is to have everybody improving and the low-income people improving faster. And we converge at some high point, not a race to the bottom. The unfortunate thing is that we're racing to the bottom. And that idea, I think, is a bad one. And the final critics will say, well, it's not so bad because what inequality does is to provide an incentive for the poor to get rich. And therefore, that's an important incentive structure. And my response to that is yes, if they could, you would be right. But we have more inequality than most other rich countries, and we have less upward mobility. We can debate that. That's a harder one to prove. Nobody argues that we've got more than everybody else, which is what the American dream was all about. But now other countries are moving up pretty fast. So my response is, let's create an opportunity system that does make it possible for people to move up and to overcome these problems. Now, what are the problems? Let me just mention those briefly. I won't say too much about the evidence, but if you want to know about it, ask me. I've got all the data about what's happening. The essence of what's happening is what I've already said, and that is that we're improving the economy, but most of it's going to the very top. The other thing that's happened during most recessions since World War II, since 1948, is that when you have recovered from those recessions, the average income of the bottom 90% of people increases faster than the top 10% of people. In the recession we are recovering from now, that didn't happen. The incomes of the upper 10% went up by almost 120%, almost double during the recovery. And the bottom 90% average income went down by almost 20%, 18% or so. That's a new world. Most of the income was going. But I think the evidence now is clear and convincing. It was not when we at the Economic Policy Institute started preaching this message in the 1980s. We had doubts that it was actually happening, but we don't have that anymore. Everybody agrees now that you're getting it, and then the only debate is what I've mentioned. That is there anything you can do about it, or is it really a problem or not? Now, what difference does it make? And you know that it makes a lot of difference. At first, there's serious political problems. We cannot have a democratic society with growing inequality in wealth and income. And that's been demonstrated throughout history and throughout other countries. Democratic institutions cannot withstand growing inequality of wealth, extreme inequality, that kind that we're getting. Why not? Well, it's because the wealthy have a way to control the political system, and do. And the consequence of that is they have rigged the market and rigged government policies so that they get most of the gain. Are they in a position to get most of the gain? I commend to you Bob Reich's latest book, which has just come out. It's called Saving Capital for the Many, Not for the Few. And what Bob's a lawyer, not an economist, but what he documented was how precisely the lobbying, the revolving door in Washington from lobbyist to public official, and how they have it's a stealth campaign. You don't know all that's going on because it's not visible to everybody. But what they're doing is changing the rules of the corporation, changing if they can't keep a law from being passed. Like I tried hard. The hardest, biggest disappointment I had is to reform our labor law. Our labor law is still rooted in the realities of the 1930s, not the world that we're in today. We passed a bill through the House with almost 100-vote majority, which is unheard of. And we had 58 solid votes for passage in the Senate, but never could do it. Why not? Well, a willful minority, representing about 10% of the U.S. population, was able to block the will of 90% of the people with the way the rules are rigged. Another indication is, of course, look at our patent laws. And Bob takes a hard look at those. One of the reasons our drug prices are so high is because of monopolies. Now, what did the pharmaceutical industries do? They got it into the legislation when we passed Section D of the Medicare Act, that the federal government could not bargain with the drug companies over the prices of the drugs. It also got a provision in saying that the people could not bring those drugs into the country from other countries that do bargain with the drug companies. One of my main drug companies is TRICARE for Life for the military, Department of Defense. My drugs almost all cost me zero. Why? Department of Defense bargains with the pharmacy companies and gets the rules down, but the rules get rigged so that you don't do that. The rules get rigged about who owns the pension funds. My view was, and if I had been challenged, I think I could have sustained it. Pension funds belong to the beneficiaries. Along comes my successor saying, no, it belongs to the companies. And I thought the law was pretty clear. It said the company put up the trust funds to pay the pensions. And it wasn't, the companies argued that all we ever said we'd do is pay the pensions. And no, that's not all you said you'd do. You said you would put aside a fund. We don't know how long you're going to be here. But we want those workers to be able to retire. Well, as soon as they say it belongs to the companies, you create takeovers. Because now you can go in and get a loan to buy the company by using the company's pension as collateral for the loan you're going to get. And therefore, you can take it over, lay off workers, and inflict a lot of damage on the system because of one rule change. And but Bob Reich does a lot with that. I don't think I need to say any more about that, except to say, obviously, growing inequality is a serious political problem. It's also a serious social problem and psychological problem. And part of that I've already mentioned. That is, the evidence is very clear that a lot of social pathologies are highly correlated with inequality. They're not all well understood, but not all agreed to, but the evidence is there. Life expectancy. Countries with greater equality have longer life expectancy than we have. Incarcerations is directly related to inequality. Health, generally, is healthier people, less obesity in countries that have more, and even among the states that proposition holds up. If you look at those states that have less inequality and look at places like Texas with a lot, then you have fewer health problems in the states that don't have it. And part of that is the stress. Part of it is because the political system makes it hard to deal with a lot of problems, with health care, for example. And therefore, that's where the political and social interact. Now, it's also true that it's hard to solve any of your economic problems if you have growing inequality of wealth and income. Why? Well, if we go back to the time that I was talking about to start with, we had a great deal of unity in this country. We had some disunity because we hadn't solved all of our discrimination problems, and everybody wasn't involved yet, but we laid the foundations for it. We'd come through a war and a depression, back-to-back unifying influence. And not many people would object to high corporate taxes and didn't, and we had corporate taxes. Today, corporate taxes, you have to go back to that time to find corporate taxes lower than they are today after 1942. And why is that? Well, the wealthy people have seceded from the country to a significant degree. If you get great inequality of wealth and income, the people at the top have less and less empathy for people at the bottom. And they will therefore rationalize why they ought not to pay taxes to improve the schools for low-income people. And the rationalization, fortunately, we're doing away with. The rationalization was a theory that guided most American schools. And that was that learning was mainly due to genetics. And therefore, those people couldn't learn anyway. And therefore, you ought not pour a lot of money down that rat hole. And we got people like Charles Murray who write books to prove that. And In order to solve the serious problems that we face of the environment, foreign policy, restoring broadly shared prosperity, we got to build unity and have people, and we cannot allow the system to be hijacked by people who have vested interest in the status quo. And that's one of the big problems that we have. It goes back to the New Deal. If lower and lower income people don't have the money to buy the stuff we're producing, then we're not going to be able to have enduring prosperity. What happened to change? Why did we get all that change? Well, the basic thing that happened was some universal imperatives, the globalization of the labor market. Around 2000, that took place because when China, India, and the former Soviet countries joined the international trading system, the labor market doubled in size to about 3 billion people. Now, one characteristic of that market was that there are a lot of people in those countries who were well educated and low paid, and therefore American companies, either American workers started competing directly or indirectly with all of those people. Directly with immigration. A lot of those immigrants will come here. Indirectly with outsourcing and companies moving things overboard. So it goes to the question of having a global labor market. What do you do about it? And what we don't do is what we are doing, I think, and that is don't adopt a low-wage option as a way to compete. What globalization of product markets do for you is to give you a choice of how you want to compete. And you only got two options. You can either work smarter or harder. That's it. And the harder is self-limiting. And that's what you get if you have a wage strategy. You're going to try to compete with wages. You will lose, and you wouldn't want to win because there are always countries and places with lower wages. It's also self-limiting. The way most American families overcame the first wave of declining real wages for men was more women working. That's the way you sustain family incomes. There are not many families with another wife to put into the workforce. Therefore, the next thing you did was have equity on your housing to sustain consumption. The housing bubble and burst put an end to that. And then now, if we don't start raising wages, keeping wages up, living conditions will decline along with the real wages. So far, they haven't done it as much as the real wages. Now, if you take the other option, which is to compete by value added, which means improving productivity and quality, a lot of things flow from that. But the essence of what you're doing with that one is using technology and work organizations to substitute ideas, skills, and knowledge for physical resources and hard work. Peter Drucker illustrated that with computer chip and the T model. He said the T model was 40% idea, skills, and knowledge and 60% raw material. And the computer chip, seminal product of our time, is the computer chip, and it's 98% idea, skills, and knowledge, and 2% raw material. And that's happening kind of across the board. We don't know where that leads, but it's not self-limiting. It opens up the prospect of either heaven or hell. We can greatly improve the human condition, or we can have a situation where the machines take the place of outsourcing and the rest and start replacing people. And we used to argue that they wouldn't ever be able to do that. A couple of my colleagues wrote a book saying that you could get a robot to do anything except know when to turn left into oncoming traffic. Now Google's done it, and therefore maybe nothing is saved. So let me conclude this by saying, what do we do about it? I believe first thing we ought to do is not we have developed the low-wage strategy by default. That's because we didn't believe in strategies, because we thought that was Ronald Reagan, a couple of my programs, he thought was so socialistic and therefore wouldn't continue them. There's cooperative labor management government programs, and they discontinued a lot of those. But the strategy that we ought to accept is say we're going to try to compete with productivity and quality and flexibility. What do you need to do that? First thing we need to do is go back to a full employment strategy. Nothing would improve the power of workers and improve the conditions of people more than having full employment. That's what has weakened, as the unemployment has weakened the bargaining power of workers. It's also the place that we can get a lot of resources to solve a lot of the problems that the country has. There's monumental waste in unemployment. Another lesson the New Deal taught us, that nothing was more perishable than the labor of a human being. If you didn't work yesterday, there's no way you're ever going to make that up. If we embody that labor in things that people need, schools, bridges, infrastructure, we can put it to work and capture it. We would have been much worse off in this country if we hadn't captured all that stuff and we'd had trouble winning World War II in the Pacific if we hadn't captured all that. PWA produced 2 aircraft carriers, and they were critical to our ability to go out there. So the idea that what the government does is not worth doing doesn't make any sense. In order to have full employment, we've got to have a balanced program. You can't just rely on fiscal policy or monetary policy. Right now, our problem is that because of a failure of fiscal policy, as the executive branch, we're relying too much on the Federal Reserve, and the Federal Reserve might not have the tools to help us if we get into another one because of that. The balance, and of course there's a limit to what you can do with monetary policy. You can make interest rates available, but if nobody's buying, nobody's borrowing, you don't do anything. So the idea that Keynes was wrong, that demand is not the problem, is not valid. I believe we also have a balanced international trade policy. It ought not just be for higher income people. That's one of the reasons there's so much opposition to the TPP. If you had a reasonable adjustment program in the country so that all the costs wouldn't be borne by workers who got displaced, you would have less opposition to it. If you saw to it, and I tried to get them, I said, I will support it, NAFTA and that, if you'll make one agreement, that you will have an adjustment program and you will not weaken any of our environmental labor laws by what you do. They wouldn't do that. The World Trade Organization is opposed to that. So you have to see to it that you don't just do things to protect intellectual property rights and investors' interests, but you do something to protect the public interest. And you ought to have labor and environmental standards that are enforceable in every trade agreement that we get. We ought to also have a high value-added immigration policy. Our immigration policy is an extension of a low-wage development strategy. They're not protecting the foreign or domestic workers with what they do. And they have perpetrated fraud on the public by arguing that you've got a shortage of college-educated people, and therefore we've got to import a lot of people. They can't prove that. And the economics of it says that we do not have. And that everybody agrees, the economics of immigration. If you bring in people who fill shortages, who complement your people, everybody's better off. If you bring in people, displace your people, and lower their wages, some people worse off, some are better off, and you get conflict. We can have a policy. Canada has a policy like that. Not as good as it ought to be, but it's still among the best in the world. We need to have minimum and prevailing wages. We need to take wages out of competition. And we can get into a debate about whether that's good or bad for the country. I think it's good for the country unless you believe in a low-wage development strategy. If you believe, as many economists do, and Alan Greenspan implied that we need to compete with wages, then you don't want to have them there. You want to do something like the earned income tax credit, which is a wage subsidy, which can lower wages and not keep them up. That's where you need to have both of them, not just one of them. One of the most important things I think we need to do is to strengthen the right of workers to organize and bargain collectively, strengthen their ability to participate in the protection of our labor laws. I would have, for example, labor management, safety, and health committees in every major workforce. You're never going to protect the safety and health of workers through inspections and regulations. You have to give the people in the workplace the power, knowledge, to protect their own interest. And but if you don't have somebody representing the workers' interest, one of the reasons, and there's evidence of this, research evidence, a major factor besides declining real value of the minimum wage and taxes that has caused the growing inequality is the declining power of unions. In 1950s, unions represented a third of the workforce, about 35%. When I was Secretary of Labor, represented about 20 and 25%. Today, it's about 10 or 11 or 12% of the workforce and becoming insignificant. Why? Well, they don't worry about you anymore. See, the unions used to be able to raise everybody's wages because the non-unions would raise wages to match the union wages in order to keep the union out. So they were really having, but now if you're not big enough or strong enough to improve your own wages, you're in trouble. And most of our labor laws, all of our labor laws, are not self-enforcing. They rely on somebody in the workplace to help you with it. I think we also need to pay a lot of attention to corporate governance. We ought to try to get it back to the time that they don't have short-run profit maximizing and looking out only for stockholders. They all look out for all stakeholders. I've served as a workers' representative on corporations, and I can tell you that most all those managers would now say that they were better off because they had somebody there who was speaking for the workers. And because workers are an important part of the company, which is what the old model used to be about. Need to have somebody there looking out for the consumers and the public and the environment. Now, the other thing, last thing I'll say we need to do is have political reform. We're not going to get any of this until we do something about campaign finance, the way campaigns are financed. And I mentioned the unions. In this last campaign, the upper 1/10 of 1% of income recipients who contributed to the Democrats gave 4 times as much as all the unions combined. And therefore, the unions used to be a major source of funding these things. They no longer have that. And until we reversed Citizens United, which said corporation is a person and therefore free speech. Spending money is free speech. That's nonsense. You can argue that the corporation is a person, but they're a person and protected in their property rights, not in their political rights. That's a big difference. John Marshall, said corporation was a separate entity, invisible, intangible, and existing only in the contemplation of the law. But that doesn't give you the right to say, nor, and of course the McCutcheon decision, saying you deprive rich people of their free speech if you limit how much they can spend. And I don't think that's right either. I think we need to change that. Now, from what I've said, you know that I tend to be a pathological optimist and believe that we can do this. But it's not going to be easy. But I think what we really have to do is educate the public, which you all are doing, and secondly, get everybody out to vote. If I could pass a law in this country that I thought I had any chance, I'd do what the Australians do and require everybody to vote. You'd be penalized if you don't vote. And that way, maybe you'd pay more attention to being educated and who you voted for. All right, let me take some questions now.
Thank you, Dr. Marshall.
Thank you for your thoughtful presentation. Every time I hear economists talk about solving the problems, they always mention the word growth. that without growth, we can't do what we need to do. It seems to me that ought to be something about sustainability that could be brought in. I mean, how can the Earth's population continue to grow when we have 200 billion people on the planet? That doesn't make sense that you have to constantly have growth. Isn't there some economic model that talks about a sustainable way of growing?
Yeah, there are a lot of them. And I pay a lot of attention to sustainability. That's the reason I think we ought to have environmental regulations. And I think you're also right that growth is what monetary fiscal policy is all about. But what I would say about that is we've been having growth. It's just who gets it is the problem. And what I want to do is not redistribute. I would like to pre-distribute. I'd like to have people with the ability to earn it before the corporations and CEOs and those folks get their or the financial interest, get their hands on it. Once they get their hands on it, a lot of luck getting it loose from them. But if you see to it that people have an equitable sharing of the benefits and costs of growth before it takes, as written into the rules, not have rules so that you don't, or that you can be fired at will or not able to improve your condition.
Let me ask you about the Trans-Pacific Partnership. I don't know what you've been allowed to see or know about it, but based on your knowledge, can you give us any indication if it passes what the effect might be on the American worker? Thank you.
Well, the real problem, Lou, is that I don't know what's in it yet. And that's what bothers me is, and I've been trying hard to find out. From what I do know, the following is the case, and that is it does not do enough to protect the environment, environmental conditions. It was not negotiated by people who really were serious about the environment. Just like in our trade agreements, they will always say we'll put labor standards in order to get the labor vote. Not because they really believe in it and believe that it's good for the country, for workers to be better off, or good for the company for it to be better off. The best companies in America know that. Best companies know that the safety and health of their workers, as one chairman of the board of a major corporation said to me, DuPont, said, that's our strongest profit center, protecting the safety and health of our workers. Same reasoning about the environment that they live in. You can't separate those two. And therefore, but says what you get now here preaching about it, you're going to cause our competitors who don't understand this to find out about it. And I said, well, compete with something else. There'd be plenty to compete with. They had the same thing in the textile industry. What I always try to do is not say that we're going to write a regulation that nobody has ever done. So you'd pick out somebody, benchmark them. And the people who negotiated, and that's the other one of my pet peeves, is you have to have very sharp elbows, even if you're a cabinet officer, to see to it that your voice gets heard in those trade agreements, because the natural tendency is to freeze you out. And I think what's happening in the world, not just in the United States, is the people getting fed up with the elites. And it's across the board. You got left and right elites who people are fed up with. And one of the things that I hoped would happen, because they had so much trouble, getting any kind of trade agreement passed, is that they would understand that they really have to have people at the table who represent the function they're talking about. That didn't happen.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Towards the end of your presentation, you alluded to the advances in automation and things of that nature. And I guess my question is about that. With the advancement of nanotechnology and robotics and artificial intelligence, there's just going to be a general rise in the capabilities of capitalists to replace labor with machines that obviously you can't unionize, and those machines don't care about TPP or so on and so forth. I guess my question is, if that is an inevitability, then we have to have some sort of minimum support structure, a minimum wage beyond what we'd thought about
and social
before.
safety net.
Yes, and I was wondering if there has ever been any thought. We think about cost of living adjustments in Social Security, et cetera, based upon rise in prices. Could we, is there any way to factor in rise of productivity into the cost of the taxes we levy against corporations?
I think so. I think the answer to that is yes. We might have. I think we'll have trouble doing it. But the basic idea is that's the reason I said this could be heaven or hell. The heaven would be that we'd find to solve the economic problem. You know, up until the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, life was nasty, brutish, and short for most people because just survival was a problem. And now, because of this process of substituting ideas, skills, and knowledge for physical resources, and the information and technology business is very different from our traditional goods market business. I used to be chairman of the board of the Institute for the Future, which is a research organization. We sold information. I sold you my information. I had more of it. You know, if I took on your project, I sell you my car, you get it, I give it up. That's the physical world. In the world of ideas, skills, and knowledge, I'm not sure you get diminishing returns. And I do know that it has the possibility to solve all the problems, a lot of the problems of the world. If we just, now, what would you do to do that? I think first we need to have well-trained, well-educated people. That's the way we take advantage of that technology and invent more. If you're going to compete in a world, a global world, where a lot of people pay a lot less than you are, only one way you're going to make it, and that's do something they can't do yet. And that means be innovative. The world belongs to the creative and innovative. And part of the idea about equitable sharing of the benefits of that, first place, you're not going to get that without a lot of government invention. I used to be on what was called the DARPA board. And a good bit of the technology that you have was invented, we could defend it by defense. Things that we knew that were good for us anyway. We need to be able to defend it because it's good in and of itself, not because it's something we want to do for it. Now, we need to do the R&D. If we don't, we're in big trouble, and we're cutting our spending on R&D. And many of the companies are cutting their spending on R&D and relying on the government to do it. The logical division of labor is what we've been doing. The government pays for the risky long-term things, but it ought to see to it that when Apple or somebody takes it over, they don't monopolize it so they get all the benefits of it when they didn't invent any of it. All they did was to commercialize it, which is not unimportant. But the other thing we could do is greatly increase the amount of time we had for enjoying the quality of life, raising your kids, free time, longer vacations like they have in most other countries, parental leave when babies. I do all of that as a way to maintain the work, but recognize that we don't need as many people to do all this as we used to. And therefore, let's work out an arrangement so that people decide themselves what they want to do with their free time. I'm a strong believer in sabbaticals. First 30 years I taught for 50 years. But the first 30 years I taught, or 25, something like that, I never taught more than 2 years straight. I take off every other year. If you're going to be teaching about the world, you better be out there, seeing what's going on in the world. You can't take the students to the frontiers of knowledge if you don't know where they are. And therefore, sabbaticals. Well, if you're a worker, and your skills are becoming obsolete, why shouldn't you have a sabbatical? Be able to get it. Why shouldn't education be a free good here like it is in Finland? When I asked the Finns, why you do that? They let you get to be an architect, lawyer, whatever, doctor, no cost. Why? They said, well, we took a hard look at your GI Bill, and the return to the United States government on the GI Bill was at least 5 times as much as it cost them, and maybe 7 or 8 times as much. If you could get a return on investment like that, why would you put any financial barriers in the front of students who are qualified and eager to learn? We're going the opposite direction. We're making it harder for people to get higher education, not easier. And that's another thing where they've tampered the rules with the student loans. The student has great trouble declaring bankruptcy. Donald Trump didn't. It was pastime for him. Now and then he'd declare bankruptcy. If things started looking like they weren't going right, he'd declare bankruptcy, and had enough lawyers and accountants and people to be able to do that. But you try to do that if you're not Donald Trump, and if you're a student with a burden. We ought to make it easier for people. I would have universal service, youth service. You'd either go in the military or you go out and help protect the environment, and home health care, help teachers teach, teacher aides, and then I'd attach a GI Bill to it. That's how I got educated. There are those who said that proves we never should have done it.
Well, thank you for an excellent presentation, Dr. Marshall. The timing of a lot of the bad things that you've discussed seems to be 1980 or so with the Reagan Revolution, and yet listening to the Republican debates, they refer to Reagan as almost a saint. Could you comment on what the real situation was economically during the Reagan era?
Yeah. The first point I'd make is that no president ever is totally responsible for what happens on that president's watch. Ronald Reagan had benefited from a lot of things we did. Even though he did away with some good things we did, I thought if he had built on Camp David, there would be peace in the Middle East now. And that was the beginning of what we hoped would be the expansion of peace in that troubled part of the world. They wouldn't do it. Jimmy Carter was the one who recognized the energy problem and what we need to do about it. Created the Energy Department. Stressed conservation, alternative energy sources. And we're benefiting from that now. We're becoming energy independent. We couldn't do it then. So Ronald Reagan was the beneficiary. We appointed Paul Volcker, who brought inflation under control. I opposed it. Thought that it was, as did most of the cabinet. But the chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors and Secretary of the Treasury convinced the president over a weekend that if we didn't do that, point Paul Volcker, the money markets would go haywire. And I said, well, let them, they'll come back. There's some rationality in the end in most of these markets. And the reality was that everybody agrees that inflation was caused mainly by external oil price shocks. You can't pay $300 billion more for the same oil you brought in last year and everybody keep the same income. And if everybody's going to try, then you'll get inflation. Because you try to raise there'd been a better way to do it, which I was for. Let's get everybody not to raise their wages and raise their prices. Let's enter into agreement. We did that our last year, but it was too late to do that. And so anyway, but I do think I'm fair to him. I think what he was a great communicator. I just wish his message had been better. I think it was, as George Bush the first said, was voodoo economics. In fact, I rushed into print as soon as he said what he was going to do, because you don't get many sure things in economics. I wrote a piece on Reaganomics, and I said, to believe that you can cut taxes by $600 billion and increase defense spending to $400 billion and balance the budget by to 1984, in the words of Alfred North Whitehead, requires a temporary suspension of disbelief. And it didn't happen. So what did the president do? He's a pragmatic guy, but that's what I liked about him. And he was an amiable person. He surrounded himself with some good people like Jim Baker, who was helped him a lot. But his economic policy, I thought, was seriously flawed. I think the supply-side economics, which is what that voodoo was all about, has demonstrated itself to be wrong. Monetarism, which Milton Friedman sold the world, has got to be a faith. I define faith as that which endures in the face of adverse reality. How can you keep believing it? So they've been predicting inflation now from what the Fed's doing for 10 years or more. And it hadn't happened. Inflation is not our problem. And therefore, but in that system, you should be having it, but you're not going to have it. And I think that that was a problem. The other big problem, I think, it could well be if we could project ourselves 200 years into the future. And they wrote the history of this country, what happened to it. And a lot depends on how it turns out. They could well find out that one of the biggest dangers that America faced was the idea that the government was the problem, and not part of what I fault my Democratic friends about is not arguing that size is irrelevant. Competency is. President Carter used to tell us that people believe that we can be compassionate. Let's show them that we can be competent.
Thank you, Dr. Marshall. That's a good note to end on.